Hello. Today our video is going to be on Rizpah, and we're continuing our teaching on the matchless wonder of a mother's love. And I'm continuing from the last video that we did, which we talked about Mary. And we're not going to just be talking about the joy of a mother and her children and, the joy of motherhood, but we're going to also tap into the pain of motherhood, raising your children, the things that can happen to a mother to bring her a lot of pain, distress, and sometimes dishonor. Okay, so like I said, today we're going to talk about Rizpah. And I want to begin with, because maybe a lot of people have not heard about Rizpah and the situation with her and her sons. But there was a famine in Israel, and it had been a 3-year famine. David was king of Judah, and Saul had been king of Israel. But at this time, Saul and his son Jonathan were dead. There was this 3-year famine, like I said before, and David knew that there was something wrong. He kind of thought that there was judgment on Israel. So what he did was he went before God and he asked God, God, why is this famine going on? What's happening here? Is there judgment or what? And this was God's response to him. It's found in 2 Samuel 21 and 1.
Okay,
God
give me
is
one
going
moment. Give me one
okay,
moment.
okay. Very interesting story. I'm telling you, quite interesting. 2 Samuel 21 and verse 1. It says, Then there was a famine in the days of David, 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered, It is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites. That was God's response. Now, I'm going to give you the backdrop so that you will know what's going on, because as we go on to talk about Rizpah, the story that I'm getting ready to tell is going to be kind of important. So now, what happened after this was what happened with the Gibeonites was actually this. It started in the book of Joshua. I'm going to give you a summary of the story because it's found in Joshua chapter 9, verse 1 through 27, and there's a whole lot to read, but I'm going to sum it up for you. In this situation here, the Gibeonites had tricked Joshua. Joshua and the Israelites had come out of Egypt, and everybody in the neighbor, everybody across miles and miles and miles and miles, they had heard about how God delivered them and how he killed Pharaoh and his army. So people that were around them were afraid. So the Gibeonites, what they did was they tricked Israel. They put on old clothes, old wine skins. They had old wine skins, messed up shoes, messed up clothes, and they came to the camp of Joshua, and they told them that they were their visitors right up the street. Uh, uh, they said that they were a long way off, but they were actually right up the street. And they asked Joshua and them not to kill them because they were afraid. And so that they were right up the street, and they made up this long lie. Joshua found out that they had lied. And so Joshua made a covenant with them when they came to him. And they said, well, we're not going to hurt you. We promise that we will not kill you. Okay, so they were going to be working together, doing whatever they do. But Joshua found out that they had lied, that they really lived right up the street, so to speak, and not way across country like they had said. So the covenant that Joshua had made with them said that they would not kill them. And in the Bible, when people made covenants, they were kept. They didn't break. No matter what happened, they didn't break covenant. So Joshua could not break the covenant that he made with the Gibeonites. But what he said to them, you will be our servants. We can't kill. Joshua wanted to kill him, but he had promised them that he wouldn't. But we'll make you servants. That's what Joshua said. You will be our servants. Okay, so here we are now, back to this famine that had gone on. God told David why the famine was going on, because Saul had broken covenant with the Gibeonites. And when they were in war before Saul died, he massacred a lot of Gibeonites. And God wasn't pleased with it. God is not pleased with covenant breaking. Okay. So he killed a lot of them. And so a while after he was dead, this famine came. This is why the famine came. God told him this is why the famine is. It's because the Lord answered, like I said in 2 Samuel 21:1, it is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites. So now you understand. Okay, so since this happened, um, King David he had the Gibeonites to come to him, and they discussed what had happened. So David asked the Gibeonites, he said, well, what can we do to give you restitution for what has happened to you? And this is what the Gibeonites wanted. They said that they didn't want gold, they didn't want silver, they didn't want their women, they didn't want any of that. That's found in 2 Samuel 21:3. David asked them, how can we make atonement? It says in 2 Samuel 21:3, wherefore David said unto the Gibeonites, what shall I do for you? And wherewith shall I make the atonement, that ye may bless the inheritance of the Lord? So now, let me read you verse 4 too. It says, and the Gibeonites said unto him, we will have no silver nor gold of Saul, nor of his house, neither for us shalt thou kill any man in Israel. And he said, what ye shall say that I will do for you? And they answered the king, the man that consumed us and that devised against us, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the coasts of Israel, let 7 men of his sons be delivered unto us, and we will hang them up unto the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord did choose. And the king said, I will give them. Okay, so now let's go from there. So what King David did was this. King David, he chose 7 people from the house of Saul. He chose 2 of Rizpah's sons, Armani and Mephibosheth. Her name was Rizpah. Her 2 sons that David chose out of the 7 men to be slaughtered for atonement was Mephibosheth and Armani. And he also chose 5 of King Saul's daughters' sons. So that was 7 of them. So what the Gibeonites did was they hung them out, Armani and Mephibosheth. After he delivered them into their hands, they went and they hung them out on a hill. I believe it was in Gibeah. Okay, so now this brings in Rizpah, because these were 2 of Rizpah's sons. Okay, you can take that off, Quilla. So we're not going to focus on the 5 sons of Saul's daughters, of Saul's daughter. We're going to focus on Rizpah and her 2 sons, because Rizpah, she did more than mourning. I am sure that Saul's daughter mourned her sons as well, but she didn't go to the extent that Rizpah went to. Rizpah, Saul's handmaid, and her 2 sons. Remember, they were slaughtered on a hill. I mean, they were slaughtered and they were slaughtered on a hill. They were all hanged. So what Rizpah did was this. In 2 Samuel 21, verse 10, we're just going to read that one scripture. it says, and Rizpah, the daughter of Ai, took sackcloth and spread it for her, upon the rock from the beginning of harvest until water dropped upon them out of heaven. Excuse me, and suffered neither the birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor the beasts of the field by night. Again, that's 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 10. So this is what Rizpah did. Between 4 and 6 months, Rizpah was out there on that hill with her dead sons. And what she did was she was trying to protect their honor. And she would sleep on that cloth by night. At nighttime, she would fight the wild, the birds, the wild beasts off of her sons. And by day, she would fight the fowls of the air off and anything that flew above their heads to keep them from eating up of their flesh when they were first dead, eating up the flesh of her sons. She was mourning and fighting at the same time. Can you imagine mourning for your sons and fighting for their dignity and their honor all at the same time? Now, it says, to confirm how long she fought for them, they were put to death in the days of harvest, in the first days, in the beginning of barley harvest. So you Bible scholars, people who like researching and studying, you can find out what those days were. Scholars say that it was between 4 and 6 months, but actually, if it had been 2 weeks, that's a long time for a woman to be out in the open day and night, protecting her sons, fighting off the wild beasts. Can you imagine? You know what? I cannot imagine this. But this is what she said. Now, King David, the famine was, listen, this is very important. Even though those the Gibeonites, they got their vengeance by killing off 7 of Saul's offspring, but it did not stop the famine. The famine continued. Okay, so this time that Rizpah was spinning out there on the hill, King David heard about it. He heard about it. And when he heard about it, he went up on the hill where Rizpah was, and he buried Rizpah's 2 sons. He also buried his daughter's 5 sons, and he went back and he confiscated the bodies of Saul and Jonathan because the enemy had their bodies. So what he did was, it says, in the bones of Saul and Jonathan, verse 14, his son, and the bones of Saul and Jonathan, his son, buried they in the country of Benjamin in Zelah, in the sepulchre of Kish, his father. And they performed all that the king commanded. And after that, God was entreated for the land. So he was entreated, but the famine didn't stop. The famine did not stop. But after Saul buried those seven offsprings of Saul, the famine stopped. The famine stopped. So now we're going to talk. We're going to have some talking points about Rizpah. But I want to say this before I talk about those talking points. No, I think this is in the talking points. So let's go over some of these talking points about Rizpah and how she protected tried to protect her son's dignity and honor. Number one, she suffered because of the sins of somebody else, not her own sons. They were innocent in all of this. Remember, Saul, their daddy, was the one that made the choice to break the covenant. Nobody had broken the covenant between Joshua and 2 Samuel, but Saul did. He broke the covenant, and when he broke the covenant, that caused a famine. And inside the famine was not going to stop until until actually David found out what we can do to stop the famine. God wasn't going to stop it. And this was what it took. It took them. It took the Gibeonites getting justice for a covenant that had been broken between them and the Israelites way back in the book of Joshua. Those boys were not even born. Their mothers weren't born. So they were innocent, and they were slaughtered because of political reasons. Saul and them were actually in war when these Gibeonites were killed, but the covenant still had been made, and it was still active, that they would never be destroyed, because that's the covenant that Joshua made with them, Israel made with them. Okay, so she lost her sons out of innocence, and we're going to capitalize on that a little bit later after we finish these points. Rizpah, she kept the rule of burial for her sons. And one of the rules that the Jews had actually was this: a body was not supposed to have been left alone. A body was supposed to be buried. It wasn't supposed to lay out the way those guys' bodies laid out, not even overnight, because in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 22 and 23, let me tell you what it says. And if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be to be put to death, and thou hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. For he that is hanged is accursed of God, that thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. So these boys did not only stay hanged out there on that hill for a night, but it was between 4 and 6 months. So what it's saying was they were cursed. Rizpah knew of this. She knew of it. She wanted her sons to be buried. She did not want her sons to lay out there forever. I don't know what as a mother, or how as a mother, that she was thinking that this was going to happen. But somewhere inside of her, the instinct of a mother, she knew that something was going to happen, that her sons were going to be buried, or she would have left them out there, because she couldn't fight like that forever. I mean, she couldn't stay there like that forever. But King David heard about it, and he came to the rescue. Second point, her actions moved God to the point that he caused the famine to stop. And he did not stop the famine until after Rizpah's sons were buried. Not only buried, but buried in a very royal place. God didn't even take action. Now, we can talk about them being cursed all we want to. We can say, well, they were cursed, so they deserve. But you know what? God saw things much differently. What God saw was these were innocent boys, and I hear the cry of their mothers, which is point number 3. Revenge may have been sweet to the Gibeonites, but justice was not given to Rizpah's sons. But even so, God himself gave her justice by giving her sons a royal and a decent burial. So God heard the cry of Rizpah. He saw her mourning, and he saw her tears. Not only did he see that, but he saw her actions. He saw her heart. Her heart was saying, my sons do not deserve this. They, number one, were killed innocently. The least that they can have is a decent burial. God heard her cry. He heard her cry. And he came to the woman's rescue. It was a while before it happened, but a famine had to happen. The Bible says that God sent the famine, and he sent the famine because of a covenant that these boys' daddy had made before they were even born. See, we you know what? We end up paying for the sins of our mothers and fathers. We end up paying for somebody else's wrong. And in this case, it was Rizpah's son. But Rizpah, and that's why we call this month of teaching on mothers and their pain and their hurt, the matchless wonder of a mother's love. It can't be matched. I haven't heard any, not even Mary. I haven't heard any other place in the Bible where a mother grieved and mourned over the death of her sons and took action the way this woman took action. Never been heard of since. I have never heard of it since. She laid out there and she labored. She labored. She labored giving birth to them when she brought them into the world, and she labored even after their death to see that they were buried righteously. And God did it, gave them a decent burial. Think about it, have you ever heard of an incident such as this in your whole life? Read the Bible. Some of us said we've read the Bible over and over and over. Well, find one like this. You cannot find one. This is a perfect example of a mother's matchless love for her children. And I'm sure if these were women, I'm sure she would have gone to the same degree because she loved her children. This was love in action. Love in action. And if you really read the story, if you really think about this woman being out there on a hill alone, there was no one around, no one but her two sons, and those other five dead sons of Saul's daughter. She had no protection. She didn't even think about herself. She could have been devoured by wild beasts. Mm-hmm. She could have been devoured. She was out there alone, a female. She could have gotten, some men could have come and taken advantage of her because, there was talk in town. Rizpah is on that hill with her dead son. They talk. They talk. We always talk. And they wondered, why was she doing this? So many things could have happened to her. But she, even in death, after their death, she didn't even think about herself. She thought about her sons. So, Laquilla, I want you to come in, girl, and we're going to talk about this. I know
you've been talking. Yeah, you've been talking.
I've talked about it, but honey, there's a whole lot of more talking to do. I could really go on for a couple of hours. I don't have a couple of hours, and I've said that I won't be on here probably more than 30 or 45 minutes. But this month, we are talking about the matchless wonder of a mother's love for her children. And we see this situation matchless. Matchless. Who can match? Not even Mary. Not even Mary. Mary went to the tomb to visit, and that was good. She was concerned about his body. Yeah. I guess everybody had forgotten that Jesus said he was going to rise the third day.
Or they didn't believe it. One or the other.
One or the other. Mm-hmm. They either didn't believe it or something. But the women, notice who went to that tomb. Yep. Notice who was there at that tomb. Mm-hmm. It was the women, mothers. It was the mothers that visited the tomb of Jesus. They went there to put flowers, but when they got there was no Jesus. Jesus had risen just like he said he was going to rise. Mary was at the cross with Jesus, and I'm sure she felt the pain when Jesus called out to her, "Mother, behold your son." I'm sure all of that touched her. I'm sure she mourned, she wept, she cried, she was in pain, and she hurt, but she could only go so far because they took Jesus's body. Jesus was not an accursed person, so his body was not going to stay out there on that hill, that Calvary hill, just like they took Rizpah's son. They slaughtered them and they hung them out there on the hill. When they hung Jesus out there on the hill, because he was a son of God, he was not in a curse. He wasn't cursed. So it was impossible that he was going to hang out there all night long. So Mary, uh, and I'm sure she knew that if you hung out on a tree overnight, you weren't supposed to, that you were cursed. But Mary could not go to the extent that Rizpah went to. Rizpah went to the grave. And you know what I believe? I believe that if she could have, she would have gone down to the grave with them. Now, you know what? I noticed this by reading. And Quilla, you can jump in here at any time. By reading, if Rizpah could have kept those her sons from being killed, she would have done that. And that's proven by her loyalty to them after they died to see that they had a decent burial.
Right.
She could not protect them. She could not protect them because David was the king. And David's order was, I'm taking your two sons, Rizpah, and I'm going to take the five of Saul's daughter's sons. They're going to die. She couldn't step in and say, oh, king, don't do this. Or, oh, king, you're wrong. Or, oh, king, I'm going to protect my sons. I got my sword in my hand. You're not going to get them. She couldn't do that. She had to surrender her sons. If she didn't, if she could have, she would have saved them. But she went as far as she could go, except for getting down in the tomb with them when they took them to the tomb and buried them in Saul's father's tomb. She went as far as she could go. That's a mother's love. They go to it. Oh, and Emmett Till. Emmett Till, we can talk about his mother. Emmett Till's mother refused to have a closed casket burial. I mean, a closed casket funeral for her son. She wanted the whole world to see how they slaughtered her son innocently without justification. She wanted them to see. So, you know what? The whole world got to mourn with her. Whoever wanted to mourn with her, because then we had TV and they could see just how they just how they mutilated that young boy. I know she had to look at it. Just like Rizpah looked at her son's decay between 4 and 6 months. She watched it. Emmett Till's mother watched his body for all that time that that funeral was going on. Not only that, but when they killed Emmett, she went and she looked at his body. They really didn't want her to look at it, but she looked at it. That's the boldness of a mother. That's the bold. I want to see my son. I don't care. He's still my son. If you cut his head off, he's still my son. She looked at her son's mutilated body, just like Rizpah. She had to look at them decay. That's power. That's power, and that's also humility. Emmett Till's mother said, no, y'all not going to get by with this like that. I want the whole world to see what you did to my son. She mourned, she wept, and she wept, but her son was buried honorably. But she had the casket open. They said, no, don't do this. Don't show everybody this. Whispering among themselves, probably, no doubt, oh, she shouldn't do that. Oh, child, why is she letting everybody see her son like that? But you know what? In her heart, she knew that some other mothers could possibly understand her grief and her mourning because so many other young boys that had gone before him were killed innocently, hung, drugged, mutilated, uh, uh, name it. She knew that some mother could relate to that, and a lot of mothers could. A lot of mothers could. So Rizpah, one of the most powerful women that you can read about in the Bible when it comes down to showing the love of her children, and especially the boys. What say ye, Laquilla?
I don't. There's really not a lot for me to say. You definitely you you hit all your points. Everything's been said. I think I really like your point that was not in your notes about that she had you didn't say suffered. Oh, she had labored. The labor that she went through to bring them into the world, and then once they were no longer alive, the labor that she had to do to defend their name and their honor. So hopefully, I hope your audience understands. I mean, because you did read the scripture, but you know what the scripture was saying was, if someone was hung and they were left on that cross or on that whatever structure it would be. I'm not sure in the Old Testament if it was an actual cross, but if they were hung and left, that they would be cursed. And I think for her, it was not only not wanting, I mean, some people may think, well, if the sons are dead, what does that matter? I don't know if her sons had children, but I know that could play a part in, the legacy and the lineage being cursed. But as a living, excuse me, as their living parent, I don't know if that curse would fall on her or just her as a mother, knowing that her sons, like you said, would not have been buried honorably. And the point that she was a concubine, which is kind of adjacent to a wife to King Saul. I mean, he was dead at this point, but to be the spouse of the king, your sons have royalty. They're royal, and
royal.
Yeah. So it just when you no matter how you slice it, it was such a bad position that her sons were put in by being, not only to be killed innocently in order to try to right a wrong, but then, like you said, the way that they were left, left out in the elements. So that's the only thing. I just thought it was very powerful. I feel like I could see God giving that to you about her laboring, because that was work to be out in the elements for 4 to 6 months, fending off birds, and it says beasts. So I guess, I don't know if it would have been, I mean, if you just can imagine wild dogs or even, hyenas or whatever it would have been in that area.
Yes.
That is labor. That's work to be out in those elements day and night for that many months. And she was as a concubine, I don't even think that she, it wasn't normal for her to even do labor. I'm not sure concubines did any form of labor at all.
I don't think they did either.
So that within itself had to have been a shock as well to her system to, you go from being a kept woman inside of a house or inside of a palace, where you're waiting on the king. You're waiting on, the king, whenever he calls on you, to being out fighting for your life. And then, like you said, you're witnessing, the decomposition of bodies, period, let alone your own children. It's just
it's unimaginable.
It's very, very difficult.
And see that the labor that she went through to give birth to her children, to those 2 boys, it was physical. The labor also was a dual labor that she went through when she had to keep their bodies. She had to fight. But that other labor, she had to go through, she went through mourning. She went through an unusual type of mourning. A mourning where mothers, when they lose their children, they mourn, but they mourn outside of their presence. The children are not present.
Right.
But she was mourning in the presence of her dead sons.
Right.
Mourning in their presence, and not just for a week, a month, 2 months. It was almost a half a year.
Mm-hmm.
4 to 6 months. Some scholars say 6 months, but they know for sure that it was between 4 and 6 months that she was out there mourning, looking at her. I'm telling, it's something that I really can't even imagine. I can, I think about it and I try to picture it in my head, and I really can't even empathize with it because I don't even know how it would feel
Right.
to not just lose your son because of somebody else's mistake, but then look at them decay. Watch them
Mm-hmm.
from the time that they were murdered, fresh murder, to the time that King David thought enough to come out there and relieve her. Not just relieve her, but after he relieved her, uh, you know, it's just it's just so much in that. It's
Mm-hmm.
just so much in that. And you know what really touched my heart, and God always touched my heart with his kindness toward people and the way he treated women in the Bible, the way he thought of women. Uh, uh, no matter what society said about women, God's thoughts were always different. How
Mm-hmm.
he heard that woman's cry out there,
Yep.
and he came to her rescue. He saw her tears. He heard her mourning. And he came and he did not. I don't care what King David was the king. And we always say he's a man after God's own heart. But even David could not move God enough to stop that famine. It was Rizpah's prayers that stopped that famine. And it only happened after she got justice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she didn't get the type of justice that would rescue them and keep them from being murdered, but she got her own personal justice by having her sons buried and given a royal burial, and not just buried in a box. She was put in King Saul's father's tomb. I mean, her sons were
Mm-hmm.
put in King Saul's father's tomb. That was a royal place. So, mothers, think about it. We giggle, we laugh, we smile, we're happy, we're joyous when our children come into the world. And some mothers don't have as many problems as other mothers have with raising their children. Some mothers don't see their children die, but some mothers bury their sons. I wonder, imagine what that's like. They're not supposed to bury their sons. Their sons are supposed to bury them, but some mothers bury their sons. So motherhood, Mother's Day, I really appreciate Mother's Day, but motherhood goes further than a day where we think about mothers happy and joyous with their children. Because, like I
Mm-hmm.
said in one of my other videos, there are other mothers mourning on Mother's Day.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Not only are the mothers mourning, but there are children mourning their dead mothers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a happy day for some, but it's a sad day for many. So
Mm-hmm.
when we think of Mother's Day, there's a bigger picture than what we have been thought to see, and what we have really been almost trained to see. Sometimes we don't even think about the other mothers, the red roses and the white roses. You know, it's such a tradition now that we just do it. We do it as a tradition, but we don't really do it as a deep thinking thought, uh, uh, a soul searching thought, uh, feelings, real feelings. It's a traditional thing to give out the red roses and to give out the white roses. But the mothers, the children who are given the roses that symbolize the death of their mothers, they're suffering that day. You have children suffering and you have mothers suffering on Mother's Day. So I appreciate you guys listening. Laquilla, if you want to have a word, if you want to
Hey,
say, okay,
I
good,
got a couple things.
good, good.
So when you were talking about her getting justice, one thing that came to my mind was I, in hearing the narrative and how things played out, but then really processing the fact that, you know, Rizpah was not just some woman in a village or in town who they chose her sons because they were thieves or they were incarcerated or they just needed to grab some men. You know, she was a concubine, and again, you know, that's a step below, you know, the queen or the wife of the king, but it's still legal. You know, she still did have benefits, and just so the processing that I'm a concubine and my children are taken because number one, because of what their father did. It was right. It was because Saul broke the covenant. So
Right.
you break the covenant and you're dead, but then I have to now deal with the loss of our sons because of action that you took. And I just feel like what concubine would think that her sons would be taken? You know, I just, if you like, when you look at history and queens and, you know, any woman in royalty, her having children, that's what it's all about. I mean, she's there to produce potential heirs. And it's kind of like a promise that these heirs will be protected, even if they're called a spare. It's all about their protection and their preservation in case other, you know, whoever's next in line dies for some reason and they're not, or not, you know, not able to lead or serve. So I'm sure she was thinking, even when they first took her sons, I'm sure it was like an out of body experience, because wait a minute, you're taking my sons and you're taking both. You know, you can't take one of my sons, but then take another concubine son. So that's the one thing. I'm just trying to set this up. So to me, I feel like this is very reminiscent of what we go through just as believers. A lot of times things happen to us in life, and sometimes we feel like, why me? You know, why us? We feel like, you know, God, why would you not protect us? Why would you not preserve us? But things happen. And then in terms of when you talked about justice and timing, I know that some people could argue like, well, why didn't God, you know, stop them from being killed? Or why could God not come sooner? Why did he not come sooner than 4 months or 6 months? He couldn't have come in 4 weeks. He couldn't have come in 4 days. You know, I'm sure it had gotten around, maybe even to, I don't know if it had gotten to David, because the Bible doesn't say that. But you would think that David would have heard about this woman being up on the hill with,
he did actually,
decomposing bodies before. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, but he did hear about it. But my God, it's just like you said. It was between 4 to 6 weeks that he even heard about it.
You mean months?
Months,
right.
months.
Yeah.
Months.
So it's,
4 to 6 months before we even heard about it.
Right. So I'm just saying, I think some people, I guess I'm saying all this as a form of encouragement that this really is how life is a lot of times for us as believers. You know, things happen and we feel like, God, you should have protected me. Why did you allow this to happen? And then when you're praying for, at this point, they're dead. So it wasn't even about necessarily her praying for them to be resurrected. I'm not even sure if resurrection was a thing then. This is Old Testament, but her cry and her prayer was simply that her sons could be properly buried. To me, that's not a big ask. Number one, because again, they're royalty. They're the sons of Saul. They're the sons of Saul. So it's not even about them just needing to be put in the ground, even though the scripture does say any man, anyone should be put in the ground. But in this case, these are Saul's heirs, or you know, Michael's children would have been his grandsons, but these are Saul's offspring. What is so difficult about, you see what I'm saying? It's like sometimes, you know, those prayers can be what we feel like is just so simple, like, God, why can't you just do this? Should this not be happening? But like you said, in time, the timing wasn't the timing that anybody would think is proper, because you're like, well, my God, you come and get basically bones. They're nothing but bones. I mean, she's spent all this time and had to see this process of decomposition that is so traumatizing. And so you would think, why would God allow her to see that and go through that? But anyway, I just, I'm not saying that it's just a happy ending, but the point is, her prayer is answered. God hears her cry. He sees her grief. He sees what her desire is, and he comes through. It's unfortunate that she had to go through all that she did, though, because it's pretty it's dramatic and pretty traumatic,
traumatic.
Just to even rethink it or to hear about it.
Yeah. And I read one scholar that was talking about her trauma and how possibly she dealt with the trauma of what had happened to her, because Rizpah lived after that. After her sons were buried, she still lived. I don't know how old she was when she died.
Right.
But she still had to live after her sons were buried. So imagine when she went back home, she had to regroup. She had to regroup. And we don't know the talk of the town. We don't know what she went through. We don't know. The Bible doesn't disclose any of that to us. So we don't know any of that. But as a mother, I'm sure, and you know what? She may have even gone to her grave mourning, or maybe God just helped her to move on. We don't know.
We don't know. Yeah.
And I want to make this one point too about Mephibosheth. Now, Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth.
Yes.
Saul also had a son named Mephibosheth that was Rizpah's son. So David had a son named Mephibosheth.
You mean Jonathan?
Saul and Jonathan.
Right.
Because Rizpah was Saul's concubine, she had those boys by him. So that made Mephibosheth, Rizpah's son, Saul's son. And that may be a little confusing to people. So there were two Mephibosheths.
Right.
There was one by Saul and one by his son Jonathan.
Right.
And Mephibosheth by Jonathan, he was crippled. They were in war. The nurse was running with him. He fell and he was crippled the rest of his life. Now he wasn't the one that was killed.
Right.
But it was the Rizpah by Saul, his concubine, that was murdered. So this is to me, this is one of the most intense, interesting, thought-provoking narratives that I have read. I haven't read except for that Levi and his concubine. To me, that was kind of disturbing too. That sounded like it came out of a horror movie, that the Levi and his concubine.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But this is, I'm proud of you for doing this series, and happy for you to have the courage to do it, because I don't know if some people would even attempt to try to tell these narratives. I mean, they're in the Bible to study, but first of all, we don't hear these taught. And I could understand why you definitely wouldn't hear these like preached or taught on a Sunday. This is not Sunday material,
right?
But even in women's groups, small groups,
especially women's groups, where you got nothing but women and probably a whole lot of mothers.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's very gory. It's very jarring. It's a difficult topic, to approach. And so, but as difficult as it is, it's reality. It was her reality. And like you said, there are mothers who experience, either things that are similar in terms of the trauma, or just the fact of just loss and grief and what that looks like. And we in our modern times,
that's exactly what I was gonna point some of those out. Go ahead. I'm glad
we see examples of that. We see mothers who, like you said, when they're actually a lot of times sons, but when their children are, targeted, when their children are innocently killed, we see their form of labor and fighting for justice, fighting to preserve their good name, or to show their innocence, to proclaim their
Mm-hmm.
innocence. They're in
Mm-hmm.
court, they're out of court, on television, going and doing speeches and advocating. We see that. So this matters. It
It does
matters.
matter.
And it's amazing that it mattered enough to God that it got into the Old Testament writings.
Yes, it did. Yes, it
It
did.
made it in there. And yeah, it's something that I hope anybody listening, especially a mother, could be encouraged by. Because again, everybody is not always speaking to that sort of grief. It's a very complex grief. She didn't stay with her sons, after death only because of her grief. And that's sad, because she couldn't go home. She couldn't go into a place of comfort to grieve. She was
Man.
forced to have to be alone, to be in the elements, to be in a dangerous position,
Mm-hmm.
just to get something that should not have even been something she had to fight for.
In the first place, yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and there are mothers even today who are fighting for the dignity of their sons.
Right.
Like
And
those
daughters. And daughters.
and their daughters, like those 7 guys that was accused of raping that woman that was jogging in the park.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Their sons stayed in prison all of those years for something that they did not do.
Are you talking about the Central Park
The
Five?
Central Park 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 5 of
Exonerated.
them instead of 7.
Yeah, they're exonerated. Yeah.
Right. The mothers had to live with the fact that their sons were incarcerated. And I don't believe that their mothers believed that their sons did that.
Oh no, I think
don't
a
believe
few of them weren't even. I think a few of them were like at school, or they weren't even in the area. So you would know. I mean, just based off of that, your child didn't do it if they weren't even on the scene. But even if they were on the scene, I'm sorry to cut you off. A mother would. I feel a mother's like, I know my son, I know my child. I didn't. It's not even about not raising them to be that way, because sometimes kids do get out into society and they don't do what they've been taught. But I'm sorry to cut you off. You're right. They would have known.
Go on. Yeah. Yeah.
A mother would know.
Though, yeah, imagine. And what they were doing was they were fighting for their son's dignity.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And there are so many other men who have been incarcerated. Okay, some have even died.
Yeah.
Been shot by police officers innocently in the back. Just murdered. Like this, you know what? We could go on and on and on about
let's not even get too deep into it. Yeah, it's a little upsetting. Right.
Yeah. So it's one of those narratives that you don't hear a lot about. But when it comes to Mother's Day, there are some other things to be considered, other than the fact of this is a woman. She's living. She's married. Got kids. They're happy, and life is good. Well, life is not that good for some mothers on Mother's Day. So I think you guys. I'm sorry. Go on.
I was gonna say, and even. It's like you said, though, there's a duality to the motherhood. There are women that do or have had at one point had that type of life. But if death comes, or not even death, there are things like, illness, having a child that's in the hospital, having a child that's stricken with an illness, and, having to suffer through maybe watching them either die slowly or having to recover and fight, an illness, or having a mental health issue, a mental health breakdown. Even there are other ways of like being temporarily disconnected or separated, from a child, that your life could be good, or the moments or the type of experiences you had as a mother could be good. But when it's bad because, that's your child. And like you said, there's nobody's love like that mother's is going to be concerned and, wanting things to get better, and is doing all that they can to either make it better or just to try to be a support, just supporting. Because most times other people walk away.
Yeah.
Everybody else walks away. Mama don't walk away, but normally everybody else does.
Everybody else will walk away, yeah.
Yeah.
But mother, rarely do mothers walk away. So the matchless wonder of a mother's love. There's no love like a mother. You know what I believe? And I'm going to end on this note. I believe that nobody can pray a prayer for their children like a mother can pray, and God hears it.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I believe that God will hear a mother's prayer for her children before anybody. And he honors your prayers for your children. He honored that woman's prayer, Rizpah's prayer.
Did.
He honored it. And he honored it to the extent that he didn't even stop the famine.
Mm-mm-mm.
And do you know what happens in famines? People lose crops.
Mm-hmm.
Whole lot of stuff happens in famines. So God was willing to let that famine continue until after that woman, Rizpah, had buried her sons.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Beautiful, powerful, and beautiful. The love of God. The way a mother loves her children is the way God loves us. Matchless. Nobody can love you like God. Rizpah thought she loved her sons, but God loved her sons more than Rizpah did.
Mm-hmm.
And he loves us just like mothers, deeper than mothers. Nobody can love us like God loves us. Amen. So God's love is just as matchless as Rizpah's was for her sons. On that note, I'll see you guys next week. We're going to be talking about another mother. And you probably have heard this narrative before. I told you, I am a narrative sister. I love narratives. Mm-hmm. I get a lot of morals out of it. I see God in all of them. What I see, just like I described to you about the matchless wonder of a mother's love, I see God in all of these narratives. So we're going to talk about another one next week. And until I see you next week, you be blessed.
Please, you got to remind your audience, please share. Please share.
Oh, please. And this will be on YouTube. Share when you see it and you hear it. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Share it with other people.
Right. Because there's somebody that, maybe you can't take from this, but I'm sure there's somebody that could use it. This is not just about getting engagement and getting, subscribers or likes or followers, but when we're talking about the gospel and we're talking about, biblical narrative and growing spiritually, this is how we grow. There's a lot of content out there today that, it's I'm not downing content that isn't, Bible based or that isn't about learning God's word, but there has to be growth. There has to be
right. Exactly.
Something that that feeds you. And so it's so easy for a lot of content to be passed around and shared or even go viral that, is more gossipy or just isn't necessarily uplifting. But this, we're talking about something that you can chew on now and even the rest of your life. You can take this narrative for the rest of your life to get closer to God and understand, like my mom was saying, his love for us. And what he does, giving, stopping an entire famine, or not stopping a famine just because of a mother's prayer and her love. So yeah, and all of these, every single video for the month of May is free. So you do not have to be a subscriber. You can share this with somebody, even if they don't subscribe, even if they don't, provide any engagement. She would love that. But if they just want to hear, these are free. Usually every Monday, right? I don't want to do your commercial for you.
Every Monday, do it. I need somebody else.
Yeah, every Monday, most of these biblical narrative videos are not available to people who are not paying, who are not a paid subscriber. So she decided this month, every single video that's coming out every week. And as you can see, I mean, there's labor that goes into the videos and putting notes together. And sometimes they're studying, sometimes she already knows the material, but whatever the case, every video for this month, it is free. It's open to the public. Anybody can come and watch it. And I think she's going to keep it like that. I don't know. She might close it after the month of May and then you can't watch them for free. So you really need to go ahead watch these, but also share it.
Right.
And let us know, let us know, are you getting something out of it? What is it about this narrative or any of the others? She talked about Eve in week 1 of May, and then last week, it was technically released the week before, which was the Saturday before Mother's Day, but week 2 was Mary, and now we've talked about Rizpah. But and then next week will be the final one in the series. But yeah, for all of these videos, there's so much that you can take out of them, and you don't have to be a mother. I don't have children yet, but there's so much that I've gained from listening to the PowerPoints and the places where God has met these mothers, and it's very powerful. And I want to say this too, I don't know if you thought about this, but there's been a progression where you started with Eve, and we see that she lost a child, but we don't see anything. We don't hear much from Eve about how she feels about that loss and her grief.
How she mourned or anything.
We get like one sentence, and that's it. I mean, there's something, but we get like one sentence, one phrase. Then we see Mary, where she's there from the cradle to the cross, as they say, and we do see her going to the tomb, and how she we get more emotion from her, but I don't think we get it as raw as someone would be at that cross, and then going to the grave. But with Rizpah, I mean, this is it just doesn't get more raw than this. It just doesn't. And it's like a progression of seeing a mother both have those joys, but then the debilitating pain and grief, but God meeting her in that grief. And there's hope in that. So I promise you, that's it for me. I'm done.
Well, we've said that before, but because it's such an intense emotional issue, a narrative conversation to have, and all of that. So maybe on this note right here, we say thank you, and we hope to see. And please, whatever you do on YouTube, leave a comment. If you want to leave a comment, leave a comment. If you're a Substack subscriber, leave a message, leave a note, leave something that we will know your thought, your idea. If you learn something, or if you just want to recap on something that feel free to comment. Feel free to comment. So we'll see you next week. God bless you in the meantime.